My hands were shaking when I answered the phone. It was a number I didn't recognize, a 214 area code. Dallas, and something in my gut told me not to let it go to voicemail. "Is this Dana Mercer?" "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" "Ma'am, this is Officer Reyes with Dallas PD. We found a woman at the base of an embankment off Route 67. She had your name written on the inside of her jacket. We think she's your mother." I was already grabbing my keys before he finished the sentence. My mother, I'll call her Claire, was 53 years old, a retired school teacher who made her own jam and called me every Sunday at exactly 9 in the morning. She was not the kind of person who ended up at the bottom of an embankment on a highway outside Dallas. She was the kind of person who wore a seatbelt, who kept a first aid kit in the trunk, who still wrote thank you cards by hand. None of this made any sense. She was alive when I got to Parkland Memorial. That was the first thing the nurse told me, and I held on to those words like they were the only solid thing in a room that kept tilting. She had a fractured collarbone, 3 broken ribs, a laceration along her hairline that had bled so much the paramedics thought it was worse than it was. Her car had gone off the road. The police were calling it a single-vehicle accident. I sat beside her bed for 6 hours before she opened her eyes. When she saw me, she didn't cry. She just looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide something, weighing something in her mind, and then she reached out with her good hand and held my wrist. "It wasn't an accident," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dana, it was Marcus." Marcus, her husband of 4 years, my stepfather. I didn't say anything. I just held her hand tighter and told her I believed her. "Let me tell you about Marcus Webb. He came into my mother's life about 6 years ago, after my father passed. He was polished in a way that should have been a warning sign, the kind of man who remembered your birthday, who opened doors, who said all the right things at exactly the right moment. He was a financial consultant, or that's what he told people. He had an office downtown with his name on the door, and a LinkedIn profile with 400 connections and a row of smiling client testimonials. He drove a new truck. He wore good shoes. He made my mother laugh for the first time in 2 years. I wanted to like him, I really did. But there was something I could never quite name, a quality in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. A stillness that felt less like calm and more like patience. Like a man who was always waiting for something. My mother married him 18 months after they met. I stood at the front of a small ceremony in her backyard and smiled because that's what you do. After the wedding, things shifted slowly. Too slowly for anyone to point to one moment and say, "There." That's when it changed. It was more like a dimmer switch being turned down over years. She stopped calling me every Sunday. She started qualifying her sentences. "Marcus thinks," "Marcus says," "Marcus would prefer." She sold the house she'd lived in for 20 years because Marcus said it made more financial sense to buy something together. She closed the savings account my father had helped her build because Marcus said he had a better investment strategy. By the time I understood what was happening, she was already deep inside it. She told me everything from her hospital bed over the course of 3 days. About 8 months ago, she had discovered something. She'd been looking for the deed to a property they co-owned, a rental house in Fort Worth, and she'd opened the wrong folder on his laptop. Inside were wire transfer records, large ones. Money moving from accounts in her name to LLCs she had never heard of. There was a corporate structure that looked, even to her untrained eye, deliberately complicated, layer on layer on layer, like someone had built a maze specifically to get lost in. She confronted him. He was so calm, she told me. That was the scariest part. I was shaking, and he just sat there. And he said, "Claire, you've always had a tendency to misread things, and somehow that made me feel like I was the one who'd done something wrong." After that, he started watching her more closely, her phone, her email, where she drove, who she talked to. She felt it without being able to prove it, the way you can feel. Eyes on the back of your neck in a crowd. 3 weeks before the accident, she had started quietly pulling together documents. Bank statements, copies of wire transfers, a folder she kept at the school where she volunteered twice a week, somewhere he would never look. She had called a lawyer, not a local one, someone 3 hours away in Austin, and made an appointment for the following week. The appointment she never made it to. He knew, she said quietly. I don't know how, but he knew. I drove home that night and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I opened the drawer where I keep things I don't know what to do with, and I found the card. It belonged to a woman named Priya Sandhi. We'd gone to college together. She was 2 years ahead of me, finance major, sharp in a way that made professors nervous. After graduation, she'd gone into forensic accounting, tracing money, finding hidden assets, building paper trails through corporate structures designed to obscure them. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. I texted her at 11:30 at night. I know this is out of nowhere. I need your help. My mother's in the hospital. I think her husband tried to kill her. She called me back in 4 minutes. Priya drove down from Fort Worth that Saturday with her laptop and a portable hard drive and a look on her face that meant she had already been thinking about this since my text. I laid out everything my mother had told me, the LLC names, the property in Fort Worth, the wire transfers, Marcus's consulting business, and Priya listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small spiral notebook in handwriting so tiny I couldn't read it from across the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long has he been doing this?" she asked. "We don't know," I said. "At least since before they got married, maybe longer." She nodded slowly. "Financial abuse of this kind, it's usually not new. Men like this have a pattern. They find someone with assets, someone trusting, someone who's been recently destabilized, grief, divorce, illness. They move deliberately. The structure your mother described, the layered LLCs, that's not something you build in a hurry. That took planning." She opened her laptop. "Give me the LLC names." I read them to her from my notes. She typed, searched, cross-referenced. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I made coffee. She didn't touch hers. "Okay," she said finally. "Here's what I'm seeing. 3 of the LLCs were registered in Delaware standard practice for people who want to obscure ownership, but 2 of them had the same registered agent, a small law firm in Houston with 7 active clients, 3 of which were connected to Marcus through a consulting contract he'd listed on his own website 2 years ago and apparently forgotten to remove. The 4th LLC had a P.O. box in Austin. The 5th had a phone number attached to it in a state filing, and that phone number matched a number stored under storage unit fees in a document my mother had photographed from his desk drawer. He wasn't careless, Priya said. But he wasn't quite careful enough. People almost never are. I asked her what we needed. Access to the accounts he moved the money into, she said. Or better, a paper trail showing she never authorized those transfers. If we can get her original account statements from before the marriage and compare them to the transfer records she found, we can show the money moved without her knowledge. That's wire fraud at minimum. Combined with what happened on that highway, if we can connect him to the accident, that's a completely different category. How do we connect him to the accident? She looked at me over the top of her laptop. Do you know if there were any cameras on Route 67 near where it happened? I'm not going to pretend the next 4 weeks were anything other than the hardest of my life. My mother was discharged after 9 days. She couldn't come back to the house she shared with Marcus, obviously, so she came to stay with me. She slept in my guest room, and some mornings I could hear her awake at 5, moving quietly around the kitchen, and I'd come out and find her sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, just staring at nothing. I didn't always say anything. Sometimes I just sat across from her. That was enough. Meanwhile, Priya and I were building something. Slowly, carefully, without Marcus knowing. He'd called the hospital twice while my mother was there. She didn't take the calls. He'd sent flowers, I'd had them removed before she saw them. He texted me once, a message so measured and warm that it made my skin crawl. Dana, I'm so worried about your mother. Please let me know if there's anything I can do. She means everything to me. I didn't respond. Priya found the first real crack about 10 days in. One of the Delaware LLCs had been used to lease commercial storage space in Arlington, a unit large enough for office equipment or documents, and the lease had been paid in cash for 3 years running, always in person, always on the last Thursday of the month. The storage facility had security cameras. The property manager, when Priya called and explained she was doing a fraud investigation on behalf of a client, agreed to pull the footage rather than wait for a subpoena. Marcus's truck was in 8 months' worth of last Thursday footage. We didn't know yet what was in the unit. But we knew the unit existed, and we knew he was visiting it, and we knew he'd been careful to pay cash, which meant he knew the unit needed to not be found. The second crack came from my mother herself. She had been quieter than usual one evening, and when I checked on her, she was sitting on the edge of the guest bed with a piece of paper in her hands. She held it out to me without speaking. It was a printout she'd kept in her folder at the school, one she hadn't mentioned yet, a receipt. Marcus had purchased a roadside vehicle inspection kit from an auto parts website 14 months ago. The kit included, among other things, a brake line pressure gauge, not damning on its own. But combined with everything else, it sat in my stomach like a stone. I photographed the receipt and texted it to Priya without saying a word. Her response came back in 2 minutes. Save everything, we're almost there. We brought what we had to a lawyer named Karen Ellsworth, based in Austin, the same one my mother had originally planned to see. Karen was in her early 50s, compact and efficient, with a desk covered in color-coded folders, and a way of asking questions that made you feel like she already knew the answer and was just giving you the opportunity to confirm it. She listened to everything. She looked at everything. Then she sat back in her chair and folded her hands. We have enough to initiate, she said. The financial fraud case is the strongest: the wire transfers, the LLC structure, the fact that her signatures appear on documents she says she never signed. That's forgery. That's fraud. The accident is harder because physical evidence from the car will have to come from the police investigation, and we'll need the DA's office involved. What do we do first? I asked. We go to the Financial Crimes Unit of the FBI, she said, not local police. The transfers cross state lines, that's federal jurisdiction, and frankly, the FBI has more resources to unravel a corporate structure than a local detective. She looked at my mother. And you're going to need to talk to them. In detail. Everything you remember. My mother nodded once. Her jaw was set. I'm ready, she said. The FBI investigation took 11 weeks. I won't pretend I knew what was happening inside it. Karen gave us updates when she could, but a lot of it was silence, and silence is its own kind of weight. Marcus, as far as we could tell, had no idea. He'd hired a divorce attorney, which Karen said was predictable. People like him always pivot to legal when they sense they're losing control of the narrative. He was claiming my mother had left voluntarily, that their finances were complicated but legitimate, that he was cooperating fully. He was not cooperating fully. Priya could see from the outside that assets were moving, new LLCs appearing, old ones being wound down, and she flagged it to Karen, who flagged it to the FBI, who added it to the file under obstruction. The storage unit in Arlington turned out to contain 3 filing cabinets of documents, records from at least 4 other women, 2 ex-wives, 1 former girlfriend, 1 widowed neighbor he'd befriended in Phoenix in 2014. The same structure, repeated. Find someone vulnerable. Build trust. Take control slowly. Move money. Leave. When Karen told us, I had to put my hands flat on the table to keep them steady. My mother sat very still for a long moment. Then she said quietly, I need their names. If any of them are still trying to understand what happened to them, I want them to know they're not alone. Marcus Webb was arrested on a Tuesday morning at the downtown office with his name on the door. 2 FBI agents and a Dallas PD detective walked in while he was on a call with a client. I know this because Karen told me, and Karen knew because one of the agents had texted her when it was done. He was charged with wire fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and after the forensic examination of my mother's car, confirmed that the rear brake line had been partially severed in a way inconsistent with accident damage attempted murder. The trial lasted 9 days. I sat 3 rows behind the prosecution table every single day. My mother sat beside me for the first 5 days, and then, on the 6th, she sat in the witness box instead, and she spoke clearly and steadily for 2.5 hours, and she never looked at him once. His attorney argued the financial complexity was legitimate. He argued the car damage was inconclusive. He argued my mother was a confused woman going through a difficult time in a complicated marriage. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, my mother reached over and took my hand. She didn't cry, neither did I. We just sat there, holding on, while the room moved around us. The sentencing came 6 weeks later, 22 years, after the financial assets were untangled, a process that took the better part of a year and involved lawyers and accountants and federal marshals and more paperwork than I had ever seen in my life. A portion of the recovered funds, the part that could be directly traced to what he'd taken from my mother, was returned to her. She didn't keep it all. She put some toward a small apartment in a neighborhood she'd always liked, a ground-floor place with a garden out back, where she planted tomatoes the following spring. And she put the rest into something she and Karen and Priya designed together over 2 meetings at a coffee shop in Austin, a legal aid fund for women dealing with financial exploitation in domestic situations. Women who couldn't afford the kind of help that had made the difference for her. She named it the Compass Fund. Because, she told me, When everything around you has been deliberately turned upside down by someone you trusted, what you need most is something that helps you find north again. I drove her to the apartment on the day she moved in. We carried boxes up the front walk in 2 trips. She'd bought new dish towels, yellow ones, the brightest thing I'd seen in her hands in years. She hung them over the oven handle and stood back and looked at them for a moment. Then she turned to me, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled the way I remembered from before all of this fully, without anything behind it. "Sunday at 9, she said. And just like that, she called me. Right then, while I was still standing in her kitchen, and we both laughed, and I stayed for dinner, and we talked until it was late. And for a little while, just a little while, the last 4 years felt like something that had happened at a very great distance. Something we had walked through and come out the other side of, together. That's the thing about the people who try to erase you. They count on you being alone. They build their whole system around the assumption that no one is paying close enough attention, that no one will go looking, that no one will sit across from you at a kitchen table at 11:30 at night and say, 'I believe you, let's start.' They're almost always wrong about that part.